Hey, parents, and welcome back. Today, my special guest is all about children ages 0 to 5, and she's going to share with us all tips and messages that we can implement today to start healthy conversation with our children in that age group and what we should focus on and how to talk with them about pleasure, consent, body, and what happens if you suddenly become pregnant or maybe someone they know is pregnant. So all this in this interview. Thank you so much, Michal Naisteter, for joining me today. You are a sex educator specializing on the age group of 0 to 5, and also your business is Sex Positive Mama. So thank you so much for being here today. So, we were talking about what we should start with, what will be beneficial for parents to know about. And the first thing that you mentioned is let's talk about bodies. So, I would love to hear from you why it's so important for parents when they have children the age of 0 to 5 to talk about bodies with their children.
When they're really little, there's messages that you can transmit to a very young child, and you can stumble and you can mess up, but what you can get through to them is a value. And then, your focus is more teenagers. And so when they're teenagers, this message will be carried out, but obviously it's going to be more congruent with their age. So, as far as bodies, the most important thing for young children to know is that every body part has a name. It has its own special name. It isn't something that needs a nickname or anything like that, just like an elbow doesn't need a nickname. So, my child is quite familiar with pretty much every single part of her body. I mean, we don't get too like technical or medical. I don't think she knows all the internal stuff quite yet. She's 2.5, but we do vulva. Yesterday we were talking about the clitoris, no big deal. So I think that your body is yours. You should know the right names and the right parts. You want to have autonomy over your body, and that starts with understanding it.
I know that many parents have nicknames because that's how they were raised. So, what advice you would tell parents that actually has issues to say vulva or to say penis?
Honestly, it's just practice. And I think it's totally okay for you to be upfront with your child and say, like, I know I've been calling it this, but it's actually this, and have that sort of dialogue. Honestly, it's your own stuff. It's your own thing, and it's your own baggage. And children will, even very young children, will understand our own attitudes towards them. Like, even if you're, wiping their butt, and on a diaper change or whatever, and you're reacting to like, oh, that smells or whatever, they're understanding your attitudes, and that's their natural body function. So you want to keep that in check. And the same thing with the names of body parts. And if you just treat it like it's any part of their body, they're going to understand that too.
What would you also say, like the benefit for children just to know their body parts names?
I mean, they can communicate to you when something's right or when something's wrong, which is really important. And it's important in potty training for them to know what to wipe and what to do, like saying wipe your vulva, et cetera, et cetera. They need to have ownership of their body. And in potty training, like, it's the big realization that I see that happens among parents of when they go, oh gosh, somebody else has to do it with my child. You want them to be able to have those tools. Like, I remember I was talking to somebody who said that when they taught their child the concept of anus is when he was fully able to teach his child to do, number two, if you will.
So let's talk about a very popular topic, consent. And I would like to hear from you how you explain a child age 0 to 5, and I'm sure there might be some differences with the age about consent.
So consent is really important to start teaching a child at a very young age. I see this topic becoming so popular and widespread, which makes me proud. And it starts with not forcing your child to like sit or anything like that, or hug, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually think it even starts when they're a baby, where you have a conversation with a child and you say, your grandma wants to hold you now. Is that okay? And you ask them for consent even when they're not able to reply. but you're really engaging them in this conversation about what's happening to them and their body. It obviously progresses into like, when somebody wants to hug or kiss or et cetera, and how they interact with adults and other children.
As you were talking about the fact, like asking a baby if it's okay to, to hand them to grandma, I've never thought about it from a consent perspective. If they don't want to be handed, then don't. This is even a way to practice for us as parents, listening to our children and giving them the permission to say no, even if they cannot talk. And you know what? It's hard. It's hard to tell the grandma when your child is not even talking, to say, well, you know what? My child doesn't want to be handed, so I'm going to respect their choice.
I think it can really pay off for you to start modeling and showing your child that you respect their decisions, because you want them to respect yours and you want them to have respect for their body. But it is hard because when we look at young people, it's just like, yeah, pass them around, do whatever you want with them. Everybody loves holding a baby. So, I have a baby on the way, and I'm thinking so much about how I want to honor that even more than I did with my first child.
Many parents, also when I had conversation with them about what to do if their child is masturbating in the living room or next to the grandparents, they just worry that, like, how to make that conversation in a healthy way and not create any shame or guilt.
The way that you prevent the feelings of shame is like acknowledging what's happening and saying it's okay. But you can create rules and guidelines and borders in your household and introducing the concept of privacy.
Can you give an example?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I hear about people talk about it all the time, exactly what you're talking about, like people who would like masturbate on the couch and things like that, and then the parents just like said nothing about it and like gave looks. But if it were me and I wanted to do it in a sex positive way, I'd say like, totally fine that you're touching yourself, but that's something you do, in a private place in the house. What are private places in the house? And you start to discuss this concept of privacy with your child. You make it a conversation so that they can understand what are private spaces. And what I find in talking to parents that's the most comfortable, format is to use books and to find books that fit into their lifestyle in their home and what they want to teach their children.
I think you even brought some books that are your favorite that you would like to recommend. So I think now it will be a great time for you just to share some.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many books. Right now, because I am about to give birth to a child and I'm almost 8 months pregnant. I'm thinking a lot about like showing, my child where babies come from and also what to expect about when we have the baby and when I go into labor and things like that. So I give her time to flip through books. So here's three that I do like. So Roby Harris is like the classic, in teaching children about sexuality. This book is for age 4 and up. It's not the stork, and it talks about girls and boys and families and body parts and things like that. I have the African American version of Where Did I Come From? And it's a guide for children and parents. And it's pretty, it has just images of like breastfeeding and naked bodies. And you can see this is pretty advanced level of talking, but the pictures are quite good for children to look at. I happen to have this in Spanish just because we are a Spanish-speaking household. Corey Silverberg books are really good because it's more about like the sperm and the egg. And not everybody has sperm on the inside, but some of them do. But it doesn't have the gender binary in the way that other ones do. But it doesn't like explicitly like talk about sex or anything like that. So that's also a good one.
I'm going to link the book's name in the description below. So everyone who wants to look and see what they're comfortable with and what they feel will be good for them and for their child, they can just choose. And also, you mentioned that you're pregnant, and I wonder if you can share some about the conversation you had with your daughter about like the pregnancy, and also some tips for parents about how to talk about the pregnancy with young children in a way that also the parents can feel comfortable and not to get into too much details, right? I think many times I hear the question, how much should I share?
it's based on their like level of like development, and it has to be congruent with their understanding, and you know your child the best, you know, so not every 14-year-old is the same, and not every 3-year-old is the same. So you need building blocks. I have a 2.5-year-old. She doesn't exactly know where babies come from quite yet. It's a little bit early, but she has flipped through some books and seen some pictures, you know. But it's a little bit early. But with a child of her age, you could start with explaining to them that like that they were planned, or we wanted you here, you know, things like that. And starting with their origin story, whatever it may be. But when it gets to a point where your kid is starting to ask you questions, I mean, I believe in being proactive, of course, but when your kid is asking you questions, you have to try to understand like what they're really getting at, you know? So when they say like, where do I come from? You might launch off into a whole story, but in reality, they might have been like asking, you know, what hospital they were born in or something like that. So you want to engage with them about their questions at the same time and make it a dialogue.
Yes. And I think that when you make it simple, then it's easier for parents to just know, be more engaged in just having the conversation. So, what made you become a sex educator and focusing in the young age?
Yeah. So I grew up like in a household where we didn't really talk about sex. And that's, I'm sure that's like common for so many people, but some people had open parents. And then, you know, later in life, I ended up taking a college course about sexuality. And it just like blew my mind that I didn't like learn it at home. I had really poor sex education at school. And I was like, why don't we learn about this stuff? Like everything just like under the sun. And I walked up to my professor and I was like, I want to be you. And so she guided me down to the path of getting a graduate degree in human sexuality, which I loved. During the pandemic, thinking, you know what, I'm going to start doing some sex education with my 2-year-old because it's just me and her. And how can I homeschool her right now? And I was like, well, this is one thing I know. And it's been a great adventure to navigate. And I've been bringing, you know, parents together and, you know, I'm kind of, it's all unfolding, but it's been really fun for me.
If anyone is watching our conversation and they want to reach out, they want to work with you or, you know, get your guidance, what's the best way they can contact you?
Yeah, follow me on social. I'll answer. Sex Positive Mama.
Perfect. And I'm also going to link that in the description box as well. Any final thoughts, anything that you want to end with?
The most powerful tool, the most powerful resource kids can ever have is their parents or their caregivers, because a lot of sex education is really values education. And when I say values education, I mean, you know, talking about like what's okay and what's not okay and when. And these are discussions, and it really needs to awaken your like critical thinking mind, you know, when I think about teenagers, for example. And so there's values that I want to teach to my child even at a very young age, and we're going to keep on expanding them, you know, as both of my kids grow actually. But I can't rely on a school to give values education because I want to be the one that makes sure that my kid comes out thinking, you know, that sex is a positive thing throughout the lifetime until they're senior citizens. I think that we're here to really shape and change our future generations, you know, and it starts at the home. I think I'll end with like a question, you know, for the parents, to really reflect on, you know, a value that you want to transmit to your child about sexuality, whatever it may be. Start brainstorming how you can pass on that message to your child. So actually it's kind of homework, isn't it? But I'm curious what the value is, so feel free to follow up with me.
That's beautiful. Michal, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing from your knowledge and information and helping parents in talking about these very important topics starting in a very young age. So thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Michal.